Family Guy's had some pretty bad luck when it comes to video games. Competing shows in the early 2000s got tons of them, and some were actually pretty good. But Family Guy got just one. Family Guy the video game. And it was terrible. You could play as Brian, Stewie, and Peter, and all three of them were so bland. Brian's levels are super slow and have you sneak around to avoid being seen by other characters, Stewie's have some solid puzzle platforming elements, but way too many enemy waves, and Peter's are just button mashers. Thankfully though, that's not where the story ends. As licensed games died down and the 2010s began, Heavy Iron Studios, one of my favorite game developers, got their hands on the IP, and wow did they do it justice. Back to the Multiverse is a phenomenal video game adaptation of Family Guy, and is probably the best licensed game of the 2010s, which sounds pretty bold, but name a better one down in the comments. I'll wait. Exactly. Now, the name sounds very similar to an episode of the show, but this game's story has its own thing going on that's entirely separate from the Road to the Multiverse episode, and I think that's a good thing. The episode had some top-notch humor, and the unique art styles were handled really well, but a game doing something new with the source material is almost always the better option. When a game follows the plot of a show or movie, it does a worse job at telling it, for the most part, and as a result, completely removes story as a reason to play the game. I don't play games for story, but I'd much prefer when they try something new and write a story to contextualize the gameplay, not the other way around. The premise here is quite simple. Bertram tries to destroy the universe, and Stewie and Brian have to make sure that doesn't happen. To do that, they follow him from universe to universe and try to foil his evil plan. Each level has a more specific setup to justify the objectives within, but they're not really worth talking about. They do really keep it interesting though. They all feel really different from each other and shake up the context of the gameplay. The story itself isn't much, but it does maintain the feeling of Family Guy, and it sets up the gameplay, so check, check. The writing needs to be especially credited though. It matches the dark humor of the show perfectly, and has a few moments that genuinely made me laugh. It's good stuff. Turning a 2D animated show into a fully 3D video game had to be a very daunting task. The first Family Guy game proved that. These characters just don't transition to 3D very well. But in this game, they're about as good as you're gonna get. Something looks off, but when you try to point to something specific, you can't. The character designs in general just weren't made to be 3D like this. The same can be said for the world itself, but to a lesser extent. Despite that, the attention to detail is insane. They recreated the world from the show perfectly. Places like Quahog look just like they do in the show, and even places like Santa's workshop that are based off a one-time location look just like you'd expect them to. Seriously, they had close to nothing to go off of, and this is probably my favorite area in the game. Some levels aren't even based on places in the show, but they fit in with the rest flawlessly. They were able to capture that Family Guy feel in every single location, and I have to commend them for it. The only thing that's kinda lacking is the soundtrack. It fits the areas fine, but it's overall pretty forgettable and nothing really stood out. Now let's move on to the gameplay, which is the biggest thing Family Guy Back to the Multiverse has going for it. It's entirely centered around combat, with minimal platforming and puzzle solving. You go where the marker is, activate some stuff, take out the bad guys, rinse and repeat. It's a simple concept, yes, but it's done so well that I don't care. The main game has two playable characters, Brian and Stewie, who you can switch between at any time, and they play just about the same. They both run for a short time holding down the left stick, jump with A, physically attack with B, reload with X, change weapons with Y, aim with the left trigger, and fire with the right. The only difference between the two are the weapons they have available to them, and they did a nice job of balancing them out. It never feels like you're playing as one character for too long. When there's tons of enemies close by, you want to have Stewie out there sending enemies ablaze with his flamethrower.
Oh my god!
And when enemies are farther away, you'll definitely want to switch to Brian to use his sniper rifle. It's not a requirement though. You could make do with either character's arsenal, but why would you want to? The fun comes from trying to get the most out of each weapon and finding new and effective ways to wipe out hordes of enemies. I really wish they took the character switching a bit farther though. A lot of games use unique attributes for some sort of puzzle solving, and I think that would have worked really well here. It's not a huge deal, but it led to me forgetting the other character was even an option for a lot of the game. The last level or two was the only time I had to actively switch between the two to stay alive, and it's consequently when I got the most enjoyment out of the game. But we haven't even talked about dying yet. This game is one of the most forgiving you'll ever find. When your health hits 0, there's a 3-second countdown, then boom, you're back in the action. But it doesn't make you restart the section or anything. You can literally just die to get full health again, and keep fighting like nothing happened. I hate life systems in games. Nothing's more annoying than getting super far, dying, and having to redo 10 plus minutes just to get back to where you were, but this game takes it too far. A game should make you redo a section if you're not skilled enough to beat it yet, but in this game's case, I think they just did it because the game would be stupid difficult without it. These enemy waves are full of dudes who move fast, all attack differently, and can hit pretty hard. So without a life system like this in place, the game would be way too hard for most people to play through. That's why I didn't want to say the game's easy, because some things are genuinely difficult, but being able to die as many times as you want with no punishment makes them a breeze to get through. Even for the boss fights, you can die as many times as you want, and they remain as damaged as you left them. Like, why? Speaking of boss fights, I will say, they're pretty good and do a nice job of putting your skills to the test, but this lack of punishment when dying kinda takes away from that. The only section in the entire game that doesn't do that is the final boss against this giant T-Rex, and it actually made for a really tough final boss. I wouldn't say that's due to excellent design though. I think it's fine, but the fact that the game gets you way too comfortable dying and restarting like nothing happened is what makes it so difficult. It trains you to see losing all your health as no big deal. Then the final boss takes away the safety net, which makes it harder, but contradicts what the game taught leading up to it. A perfect final boss puts to test everything you've learned throughout your adventure. It doesn't go against it. And while this game may put all your skills to the test for one final battle, it takes away something it made you grow to rely on. I don't think this is necessarily a bad decision though, because it makes for a really stressful and very exhilarating final boss. Hold up, I've been saying no punishment, when I should instead be saying hardly any punishment, because when you die, you lose a couple $100. I know I sound like Elon Musk saying that, but money is plentifully scattered around each area, and when you collect it, you can go to these shop portals and buy a multitude of things, including weapons, items, costumes, and the most useful of all, upgrades.
Upgrades, people! Upgrades!
You can upgrade your health bar, amount of rounds, clip size, and grenade count, which is awesome and very necessary. Your starting health bar is ridiculously small. Seriously, I don't know how I survived with that thing. These shop portals are all over the place, so as long as you spend all your money before entering a tough section, you won't lose any dough, and now there's no punishment for dying. While money is potentially the most useful item, there's also a set amount of key items in each area, and when you find them all, you unlock something new in the shop. Mostly costumes, which look sick. I really wanted to play as Brian in the suit, but I couldn't find all the items in that area, so I couldn't. I kinda wish these collectibles unlocked some other kind of reward, because these costumes are awesome and would really make me enjoy the game more, but it's whatever. In total, there's 10 levels in the entire game, and it takes a whopping 4 hours to beat them all. I'm kinda glad it's not super long though. I feel like this game would have gotten annoying given a couple more hours. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and knew exactly when to end, which is great. As far as single player offerings, all that's left is the challenge mode, which has you do some standard stuff under a time limit. They're fun and nice to have, but there's only 7, so there's not much content there either. Overall, I'd say it's a really quality experience, and I'd recommend it to any Family Guy fan out there. But the multiplayer is probably the best aspect of the entire game. It is stellar. First off, the whole story mode can be played with someone, which yes, makes it even easier, but do you know how much more enjoyable it makes it? Playing with a friend and blasting away tons of enemies as Brian and Stewie is a hell of a time. It doesn't really change anything about the core gameplay, besides letting you get more strategic with wiping out enemies, so to not repeat myself, I'll talk about the plethora of other modes you can play with a buddy. Yeah, you can do challenge mode, but there's 4 other modes that are exclusive to multiplayer. There's Deathmatch, a good old-fashioned 1v1, Multiverse Madness, which is a co-op wave battling mode, Capture the Greased Up Deaf Guy, which is essentially Capture the Flag, and Infiltration, which has all sorts of things going on, and you have to get more points than the other player. And instead of only being able to play as Brian and Stewie, you can play as any member of the Griffin family, which is so cool. The single player is fun and the game is great, but when you play all the game has to offer in 2-player, it's one of the best experiences I've had with a licensed game. Period. If you're a fan of Family Guy, go on eBay and get the game now. And if you aren't, I still think there's enough here to warrant playing it, even without the pre-established connection to the source material. Now, if you actively dislike Family Guy, you shouldn't play the game. The humor and tone of the show is all present and it would probably annoy you. Wait, why'd you even make it this far in the video? I mean, thank you, that helps me out a lot, but like, this game is not for you, so get the hell out of here. If the show's Greek to you though, I'd say try it out. It'll introduce you to that world, and who knows, you may want to check out the early episodes of the show after that. The common narrative about games based off of animated shows is that they weren't great in the 90s, then boom, the 6th console generation happened and released hit game after hit game. Then the quality drastically declined. That was the impression I had for the longest time anyways, mostly because of my experience with the SpongeBob series, but maybe it's not as cut and dry as I thought. I don't think a certain era is the reason for these stellar games. I think it's that developer, Heavy Iron Studios. Don't get me wrong, there have been other really good licensed games released by other developers, but Heavy Iron has potentially the best track record of them all. While they aren't all great, the consistent quality of these games is remarkable. The worst one I've played from them is Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights, and that was like their first attempt at that kind of game, and it wasn't even bad. After that, boom, Battle for Bikini Bottom. Wham! The SpongeBob movie game. Kapow! The Incredibles games. Even frickin' Ratatouille. And almost a decade later, we got back to the Multiverse. Yet another phenomenal game. And the thing that sucks is the fact that they aren't really making licensed games anymore. This Family Guy game from 2012 is their last attempt at one, and I couldn't begin to explain how much of a shame that is. Seriously, look at their previous work. Even after the 6th console generation, when other companies stopped making good licensed games, they kept going. They're such a high quality studio, and it's a sin that they're no longer making games like that. I don't really know what we as fans of the studio can do about it, but I'm personally going to keep diving into their games and spreading awareness for their surprisingly high quality. And to start with that, I'll finish the video by saying this. Family Guy Back to the Multiverse is the best Family Guy video game, the best multiplayer license game I've ever played, and my favorite license game of the 7th console generation. And with that said, thanks so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed it, do me a favor and tap the like button. And if you want to see more videos, subscribe. In the meantime, there's some pretty good stuff on the screen to hold you over. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you later.